Forced into an unwanted marriage to save her family's ranch, Emmeline Dorsey flees into the arms of her childhood love. But powerful enemies vow to destroy everything she holds dear. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The summer sun beat down on Whisper Creek like it had a personal vendetta against the parched land. Emmeline Dorsey wiped the sweat from her brow as she stood on the porch of the once grand Dorsey ranch house. At 24, she had the kind of beauty that came from honest work and clean living, honey blonde hair pulled back in a simple braid, blue eyes that matched the rare rainy sky, and hands that weren't afraid of calluses. "Emmy, get in here, girl." Her father's voice boomed from inside. She sighed, straightening her simple cotton dress before walking into the cool darkness of the house. Richard Dorsey sat at the dining table, papers spread before him, his face a thundercloud of worry lines and stubborn pride. "Yes, Daddy?" she asked, standing in the doorway. "I've been talking with Cyrus Mott," he said without looking up. "He's coming for dinner tomorrow night." Emmeline's stomach knotted. Cyrus Mott was the richest man in 3 counties, owner of the Whispering M Ranch that sprawled across the best land in the valley. He was also 53 years old with cold eyes that followed her whenever they crossed paths in town. "What for?" she asked, though something in her already knew. Now Richard looked up, his face a mix of resignation and relief. "He's offered to help us out of our situation. The drought's taken too much from us, Emmy. The bank's breathing down my neck." "And what does he want in return?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "He wants to marry you." The words hung in the air like a noose. Emmeline felt the room spin slightly. "Marry me? He's old enough to be my father." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "He's a good man with good land. He can save this ranch, everything your grandfather built, everything that should be yours someday." "By selling me?" The words shot out before she could stop them. Her father's face darkened. "You watch your mouth, girl. This isn't about selling anybody. It's about duty to this family. Your mother understood duty when she married me." At the mention of her mother, Emmeline glanced toward the staircase. Martha Dorsey had become a shadow in her own home over the years, beaten down by harsh seasons, and a husband whose love had turned to bitterness when the land stopped giving. "I won't do it," Emmeline said softly. "You will." Richard's voice was final. "Tomorrow night we're announcing your engagement to Cyrus Mott. That's the end of it." He stood up and walked out, leaving her alone with the weight of his words crushing down on her chest. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Emmeline sat on her bed, staring out the window at the moon-washed hills. The walls of her childhood bedroom felt like they were closing in. A soft knock at her door made her jump. Her mother slipped inside, closing the door behind her. "Emmy," Martha whispered, sitting beside her daughter. Up close, Emmeline could see how the years had worn her mother down. Once a beauty with fiery spirit, Martha now looked faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun. "I can't marry him, Mama," Emmeline said, tears filling her eyes. Martha took her daughter's hands. "How your father told me about the arrangement." "It's not an arrangement, it's a sentence." Her mother's eyes, so like her own, filled with a sadness that ran deep. "I know what it's like to marry for something other than love." The admission hung between them. Emmeline had always suspected her parents' marriage had been more about joining 2 ranching families than any real affection. "Then how can you let him do this to me?" Martha reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. "Before I married your father, I bought a small piece of land. It's nothing special, just some scrubland near the Western Creek. But it's in my name alone." She pressed the deed into Emmeline's hand. "Start something new, even if it's small, even if it's wild." Emmeline stared at the paper. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that sometimes we have to make our own choices, even when it seems impossible." Martha stood up, suddenly looking more like the woman she'd once been. "I'll leave your window unlatched tonight." With that, she slipped out as quietly as she'd come, leaving Emmeline stunned. For an hour she sat there, turning the deed over in her hands, thinking about everything she'd be giving up, and everything she might gain. Then, decision made, she began to pack. The stables had always been Emmeline's favorite place on the ranch. Even now, with fewer horses than in the good years, the smell of hay and leather brought her comfort. She moved silently through the shadows, saddling her mare, Willow. As she worked, memories flooded back. Memories of a boy with kind eyes and a smile that made her forget she was a Dorsey. Levi Thorne had grown up on the ranch, the son of the stable master. They'd been inseparable as children, building forts by the creek, racing horses across the meadows, sharing secrets under the cottonwood trees. As they'd gotten older, friendship had bloomed into something more, something that made her heart race and her cheeks flush. But Levi was poor, with nothing to his name but his skill with horses and his dreams of something better. When they were 18, Richard Dorsey had found them kissing behind the barn and had fired Levi's father on the spot. The Thornes had been forced to leave, and Emmeline had been forbidden from ever seeing Levi again. She'd heard he was still in the area, breaking horses for whatever rancher would hire him, living in an old barn on the edge of town. 6 years of wondering if he ever thought of her. 6 years of trying to forget the only boy who'd ever looked at her and seen just Emmeline, not the Dorsey name or fortune. Now, as she led Willow out into the moonlight, boots in hand to keep, quiet bonnet dangling from her wrist, she knew exactly where she was going. Levi Thorne's home was barely standing, an abandoned barn on a patch of forgotten land just outside town. But as Emmeline approached, she could see a warm light glowing from inside. Her heart hammered in her chest as she tied Willow to a post and walked to the door. She hesitated, then knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open, and there he was. At 26, Levi had grown from a lanky boy into a man. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his face was tanned from working outdoors. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had always seen right through her, were the same. "Emmy?" he whispered, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. She stood there, suddenly unsure of herself. "Hello, Levi?" He stared at her like she might disappear if he blinked. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right?" The concern in his voice nearly broke her. "No," she admitted. "Nothing's all right." He stepped aside, inviting her in. The barn was simple but clean, a small stove in one corner, a narrow bed against the wall, saddles and tools hanging neatly. It was a far cry from the Dorsey ranch house, but something about it felt more like home than where she'd come from. "What happened?" he asked, offering her the only chair while he sat on an upturned crate. The story spilled out of her, her father's. Debts, Cyrus Mott's proposal, the engagement dinner planned for tomorrow night. With each word, Levi's expression darkened. "So you ran away," he said when she finished. "I don't need saving," she told him fiercely, "but I want to be wanted, for who I am, not what I come with." Levi looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filling with an emotion she'd been afraid she'd never see again. "I wanted you before you had a name that mattered," he said simply. The words hit her like a physical force. She'd run to him on instinct, not knowing if he still cared, if he'd moved on, but in his eyes she saw the same love that had been there 6 years ago. "I never stopped thinking about you," she whispered. He stood up and crossed to her, kneeling, in front of her chair. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he took her hands in his. "I left town because your father threatened to ruin my family if I ever came near you again. But I never went far. I couldn't. Why didn't you tell me? What good would it have done? I had nothing to offer you then." He looked around the barn with a rueful smile. "I don't have much more now." Emmeline pulled one hand free and placed it against his cheek. "You have yourself. That's all I ever wanted." When he kissed her, it was like coming home after a long journey. All the years between them melted away, and they were just Emmy and Levi again, two hearts that had found each other against all odds. Dawn found them sitting on the barn steps, watching the sunrise paint the hills gold. They'd talked all night, catching up on the years they'd lost, planning what to do next. "We could leave," Levi suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else." But Emmeline shook her head. "This is our home, and besides," she pulled the deed from her pocket and showed it to him. "We have land. Not much, but it's something." Levi studied the paper. "Your mother's land? I remember that spot. By the bend in the creek with the 3 big cottonwoods. We could build something there. A small house, maybe raise some cattle or horses. The dream took shape as she spoke it. It won't be easy, but it would be ours. He smiled, the first full smile she'd seen from him. I've been saving what I can. It's not much, but it's enough to start building. We could get married under those cottonwoods, she said softly. Where we used to play as kids. Levi's eyes lit up. Is that a proposal, Miss Dorsey? She laughed, feeling lighter than she had. In years. I suppose it is, Mr. Thorne. He pulled her close. Then my answer is yes. For that moment everything seemed possible, but reality was waiting just beyond the horizon. My father will come looking for me, Emmeline said, the worry creeping back into her voice. And Cyrus Mott won't take kindly to losing his bride. Levi's jaw tightened. But we'll face them together. News traveled fast in Whisper Creek. By noon everyone knew that Emmeline Dorsey had disappeared in the night and that Richard Dorsey was in a fury. Cyrus Mott sat in his study at the Whispering M, swirling brandy in a crystal glass as Richard paced the expensive carpet. She'll turn up, Richard insisted. She's just being dramatic. Cyrus was not a handsome man. Tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice, he had the look of someone who always got what he wanted and made others pay when he didn't. I don't appreciate being made a fool of, Richard, he said coolly. Our arrangement was quite clear. And it still stands. I'll find her and bring her back. Cyrus set down his glass. See that you do. I've been very patient about the money you owe me. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'd hate to have to foreclose on the Dorsey ranch after all these years. Richard paled. You wouldn't. Business is business. Cyrus stood up. Find your daughter, Richard. You have 3 days. Levi and Emmeline spent the day at the creek land, planning where they would build their home. The plot was small but beautiful, with the creek providing water and the cottonwoods offering shade. They marked out a space for a cabin, picturing where each room would go. It won't be what you're used to, Levi said, worry creasing his brow. Emmeline squeezed his hand. It'll be better. They rode into town late in the afternoon to buy supplies. Emmeline had taken what little money she had saved, and Levi had his horse-breaking earnings. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The stares and whispers followed them, down the main street. Emmeline held her head high, though she could feel her cheeks burning. She'd never defied convention before, and the weight of judgment was heavy. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson gave them a cold shoulder until old Mr. Grayson stepped in. Let them be, he told her. Young love's a rare enough thing these days. His kindness brought tears to Emmeline's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. You two planning to build out on Martha's land? He asked. Word really did travel fast. Emmeline nodded. Thought so. Well, my boys and I can help with that. We owe your mother a few favors. By the time they left the store, 3 more people had offered to help. Folks who'd known Levi and his family, who remembered when Martha Dorsey had been the kind-hearted woman who brought food during hard times. Before Richard's bitterness had isolated her, hope blossomed in Emmeline's chest. Maybe they could make this work after all. They didn't see the rider watching them from the hill above town, or notice when he turned his horse back toward the Dorsey ranch. Richard Dorsey was waiting when the man arrived. Well, he demanded, found her, boss. She's with the Thorne boy. They're planning to build on that piece of land your wife owns. Richard's face contorted with rage. That ungrateful girl, after everything I've done for her. What do you want me to do? Richard paced, thinking. Then a cold smile spread across his face. Nothing yet. Let them think they've won. He looked at the setting sun. Let's see how brave they are when they have nothing left to lose. That night, Levi and Emmeline returned to the barn. They decided to start building tomorrow, with the help that had been offered. For now, they would rest and dream of their future. We should get married soon, Levi said as they sat by the small fire he'd built. Before your father finds a way to stop us. Emmeline nodded. Day after tomorrow, under the cottonwoods? So soon. I've waited 6 years already, she said with a smile. I don't want to wait anymore. He kissed her then, a promise sealed without words. Outside, the stars watched over them, witnesses to a love that had survived separation and was about to face its greatest test. Neither of them saw the shadow that passed by the window or heard the soft footsteps retreating into the night. The trap was already being set, and dawn would bring challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, in the quiet of the old barn, they held each other close, believing that love would be enough to overcome whatever lay ahead. Morning arrived, with golden light streaming through the cracks in the barn walls. Emmeline woke wrapped in Levi's arms, a smile spreading across her face before reality came rushing back. Today they would start building their future and face whatever consequences came with it. "Good morning," Levi said, his voice still rough with sleep. He brushed a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "Morning," she replied, leaning into his touch. "Ready to build a home today?" He grinned. "Been ready for 6 years." They ate a simple breakfast of bread and coffee before heading out to the creek land. The morning air was crisp, promising another hot day ahead, but for now it felt like the world was fresh and new, full of possibilities. When they arrived at the small patch of land, they were stunned to find Mr. Grayson and 4 other men already there, unloading lumber from wagons. "Figured we'd get an early start," Mr. Grayson called out with a wave. "My boys and I don't have much else to do today." Tears welled in Emmeline's eyes. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Levi dismounted and shook each man's hand. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "No need," said Tom Harper, the blacksmith. "Some of us remember what it was like before Richard Dorsey forgot where he came from. Besides," he added with a wink, "it's not every day we get to witness a love story like yours." By midday, the foundation was laid out and the frame was starting to take shape. Women from town arrived with food and drinks, and children ran around playing in the creek. It felt like an old-fashioned barn raising, the kind of community gathering that Whisper Creek had once been known for. Martha Dorsey appeared just after noon, riding a gentle mare, her face alight with a joy Emmeline hadn't seen in years. "Mama!" Emmeline ran to her mother's side, helping her down from the horse. "How did you know we'd be here?" Martha smiled. "Word travels fast, and I wanted to see what you're building on my little piece of land." She looked around at the bustling activity. "It's more than I ever dreamed." "Mrs. Dorsey," Levi approached, hat in hand. "It's good to see you again." Martha took his hands in hers. "You've grown into a fine man, Levi Thorne. I always hoped you'd find your way back to my daughter." The 3 of them stood together, watching as their small cabin took shape. A simple one-room structure with a covered porch, but to Emmeline, it already felt more like home than the grand Dorsey ranch house ever had. "Your father knows," Martha said quietly. "Someone told him where you were." Emmeline's happiness dimmed. "What did he say?" He was furious, of course, but Cyrus Mott was worse. Martha looked troubled. "Be careful, both of you. Cyrus is not a man who forgives being crossed. We're getting married tomorrow," Emmeline told her mother. "Under the cottonwoods, will you come?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." At the Whispering M Ranch, Cyrus Mott sat at his massive oak desk, fingers steepled under his chin as he listened to Richard Dorsey rant. The whole town's helping them. Richard paced like a caged animal. Building them a house on Martha's land, treating them like some kind of romantic heroes. "Sit down, Richard," Cyrus said coldly. "Your pacing is giving me a headache." Richard dropped into a chair, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "What are we going to do? The engagement announcement was supposed to be last night, and instead my daughter's shacked up with a penniless horsebreaker. We're going to handle this like businessmen," Cyrus replied, his voice eerily calm. "First, I'm calling in your loans." Richard went pale. "What? But you said—" "I said I'd forgive your debts when I married your daughter. Since that's not happening, you'll pay what you owe me, all of it, by the end of the week." "That's impossible. You know I don't have that kind of money." Cyrus smiled thinly. "Then I'll own the Dorsey Ranch by Saturday. But that's just the beginning." He pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the desk. Richard picked it up, his hands shaking. "What is this?" "A list of every business in Whisper Creek that owes me money or relies on my goodwill. The stables where your daughter's boyfriend works occasionally, the general store that sold them supplies, the blacksmith who's helping build their little love nest." Cyrus's eyes glittered with malice. "By the time I'm done, no one in this town will dare help them." Richard stared at him. That's cruel. That's business." Cyrus stood up. Now, are you with me, or do I foreclose on your ranch today? Richard hesitated only a moment before nodding. I'm with you. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. The cabin's frame was complete by sunset. It was small but sturdy, with windows that would catch both the morning and evening light. Tomorrow they would add the walls and roof, and by nightfall, Levi and Emmeline would have a real home. Humble, but theirs. It's perfect, Emmeline said as they stood hand in hand admiring their day's work. Levi squeezed her hand. And tomorrow, you'll be my wife. They'd arranged for Pastor Miller to marry them at noon under the cottonwoods. Nothing fancy, just vows, exchanged in the place that held their childhood memories, surrounded by the people who had chosen to support them. They rode back to Levi's barn in contented silence, tired but happy. The future stretched before them, bright with promise despite the shadows of her father and Cyrus Mott. But when they reached the barn, they found the door hanging open, the lock broken. "Stay here," Levi said, drawing the small knife he carried. "No," Emmeline replied firmly. "Together, remember?" They approached cautiously. Inside, chaos greeted them. Levi's few possessions were scattered and broken. His tools, essential for his work-breaking horses, were gone. The small box where he kept his savings had been pried open and emptied. "Who would do this?" Emmeline whispered, though she already knew the answer. Levi's face was grim. "Someone who wants to make sure we can't build our life together." A noise from outside sent them rushing back to the door. In the fading light, they saw Levi's horse, Scout, limping badly, a deep cut on his front leg. "Scout!" Levi ran to the injured animal, dropping to his knees to examine the wound. "Someone did this deliberately," he said, his voice tight with anger. Emmeline felt sick. Scout wasn't just Levi's horse. He was how Levi made his living, breaking other horses with Scout's steady presence to calm the wild ones. "We need to get him to Doc Wilson," she said, thinking of the town veterinarian. Levi nodded, his face pale with worry. "Help me make a bandage. We need to stop the bleeding before we move him." They worked together, tearing strips from one of Levi's shirts to bind the wound. Scout whinnied in pain, but stood steady, trusting Levi's gentle hands. "We'll have to walk him to town," Levi said. "It's going to be a long night." Doc Wilson opened his door to their knock, taking one look at Scout before ushering them around to his barn. "Nasty cut," he said, examining the wound in the lamplight. "Someone did this with a sharp blade, deliberate from the angle of it." "Can you help him?" Levi asked, his voice strained. "I can stitch him up, but he won't be fit to work for at least a month, maybe longer." The older man looked up at them. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, you two. Word is Cyrus Mott's been calling in debts all over town this afternoon." Emmeline felt a chill. "What do you mean?" "The livery stable fired Ben Jackson after Mott, threatened to pull his business. The general store's been told not to sell you anything more, or they'll lose the Whispering M's accounts. And your father," he looked at Emmeline, "has been going around telling folks he'll ruin anyone who attends your wedding tomorrow." Levi's face hardened. "They can't scare everyone." "They're doing a pretty good job of it," Doc Wilson said grimly. "I'm only helping you because I paid off my loan to Mott last year. Most folks in town aren't so lucky." Emmeline sank onto a hay bale, the weight of what they were facing suddenly overwhelming. "This is all because of me. Because I wouldn't marry." "Cyrus?" Levi knelt before her. "No, this is because two men can't stand to lose control. None of this is your fault." Doc Wilson finished bandaging Scout's leg. "You can leave him here tonight. I'll keep an eye on him." "Thank you," Levi said, helping Emmeline to her feet. "We won't forget this." As they walked back toward the barn, in the darkness, Emmeline couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of Cyrus Mott's revenge. Dawn broke with gathering clouds, as if the sky itself sensed the troubles brewing in Whisper Creek. Emmeline and Levi had spent a restless night in the ransacked barn, jumping at every sound, wondering if more trouble was coming. "We should check on the cabin," Emmeline said as they shared the last of their bread for breakfast. Levi nodded, his face grim. "And then we get married. No matter what they do, they can't stop that." When they reached the creek land, their hearts sank. The frame of their cabin lay in splintered ruins, broken boards scattered across the ground as if a storm had hit during the night. "No," Emmeline whispered, dismounting and walking through the destruction. All their work, all the generous help from the townspeople, destroyed in one vengeful act. Levi kicked at a broken board, his face dark with anger. This was Mott, or one of his men, or my father. Emmeline couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "We'll rebuild," Levi said, trying to sound confident. "They can tear it down 100 times and we'll build it again." But they both knew it wouldn't be so simple. Without tools, without money, and with the town now too frightened. To help them, rebuilding seemed impossible. "At least we still have the land," Emmeline said, looking up at the 3 cottonwoods that had weathered so many seasons. "And we still have each other. We're still getting married today." Levi pulled her close. "Nothing's going to stop that." They spent the morning clearing away some of the debris, salvaging what boards they could. By 11, they'd made a small clearing under the cottonwoods where they would exchange their vows. "I should get ready," Emmeline said, looking down at her dirt-stained dress. Levi brushed a smudge from her cheek. "You're beautiful just as you are." She smiled despite everything. "My mother's bringing my dress, her wedding dress." She hid it away. "All these years. I'll wait for you here," he promised. Martha Dorsey slipped out of the ranch house with a wrapped bundle containing her old wedding dress. Richard had been out since dawn, no doubt plotting with Cyrus Mott, and the house was quiet. As she reached the stables to saddle her mare, a voice stopped her cold. "Going somewhere, Martha?" She turned to find her husband standing in the shadows, his face hard as stone. "Yes, Richard, to our daughter's wedding." He stepped forward, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "There's not going to be a wedding." Martha straightened her spine, finding strength she'd forgotten she had. "You can't stop it. Emmeline loves him." "Love?" Richard spat the word. "What good is love when you're dirt poor? When you can't put food on the table or keep a roof over your head? I'm trying to secure her future." "No, you're trying to save yourself by selling our daughter to a cruel man." Martha clutched the dress to her chest. "I won't let you do it." Richard's face contorted with rage. He grabbed the bundle from her arms and threw it to the ground, grinding it under his boot heel into the dirt. "You've never stood up to me before. Don't start now." He grabbed her arm. "You're coming with me to the Whispering M. Cyrus wants to talk to you about that piece of land you've been hiding." "No." Martha tried to pull away, but years of submission had left her weak against his strength. "That land is mine." "Nothing is yours," Richard growled, dragging her toward his waiting horse. "Everything you have belongs to me, including that worthless land." As he forced her onto his horse, Martha's thoughts flew to Emmeline, waiting in her simple dress under the cottonwoods. Would anyone tell her that her mother wasn't coming? Would she worry? But there was nothing she could do as Richard spurred the horse toward the Whispering M ranch, taking her further away from the daughter who needed her. Noon came and went. Emmeline stood under the cottonwoods in her best dress, not her mother's wedding gown, but a simple blue cotton that Levi once said matched her eyes. She'd picked wildflowers for a bouquet and pinned her hair up as best she could, but no one came. Not her mother, not Pastor Miller, not the townspeople who had helped build their cabin just yesterday. "They got to them all," she said quietly as the minutes ticked by. "Mott and my father scared them away." Levi took her hand. "Then we'll say our own vows. We don't need anyone else." He was right, of course, but the empty clearing where their wedding guests should have been felt like another victory for Cyrus Mott. Just as Levi was about to speak, hoofbeats sounded from the direction of town. They turned, hope rising, but it was Doc Wilson riding hard. "Levi," he called, reining in his horse. "You need to come quick. It's your horse. Scout's taken a bad turn. The wound's infected, and I can't get his fever down." Levi's face paled. Scout wasn't just his horse, he was Levi's livelihood, his partner in the work that kept food on the table and a roof over his head. "Go," Emmeline urged. "We can do this later." Levi looked torn. "But our wedding, Scout needs you more right now." She squeezed his hand. "I'll wait here. Maybe my mother will still come." After a moment's hesitation, Levi nodded. "I'll be back as soon as I can." He kissed her quickly, then mounted behind Doc Wilson, and they galloped off toward town. Alone, under the cottonwoods, Emmeline sank onto a fallen log, her wildflower bouquet dropping to her lap. She'd been so sure that they could overcome anything as long as they had each other. Now as the clouds gathered overhead, she wondered if she'd been naive. Her father and Cyrus Mott controlled everything in Whisper Creek, the businesses, the bank, even the church. How could she and Levi stand against such power with nothing but love and a small piece of scrubland? But as she sat there, watching the creek flow endlessly on its course, something hardened inside her. She was a Dorsey, after all. And Dorseys didn't give up without a fight. At Doc Wilson's barn, Levi knelt beside Scout, pressing a cool cloth to the horse's fevered neck. The wound looked angry and swollen, and Scout's breathing was labored. "I've given him everything I can," Doc Wilson said, "but he's fighting a bad infection." Levi stroked Scout's muzzle. "Come on, boy, you can't leave me now. We got too much work to do." The barn door opened, and to Levi's surprise, old Joe stepped in. The former ranch hand had taught Levi everything he knew about horses, back when they both worked for the Dorseys. "Heard your horse was in trouble," Joe said, setting down a small sack. "Brought some herbs my grandmother used to use. Might help with the infection." Levi looked up gratefully. "You're not afraid of crossing Mott?" The old man snorted. "I'm 73 years old. What's he gonna do to me that time ain't already doing?" He knelt stiffly beside Levi. "Besides, I remember when you were just a scrawny kid trying to ride a horse twice your size. Can't let you lose this one." Together they made a poultice from Joe's herbs and applied it to Scout's wound. The horse nickered softly, as if sensing their efforts to save him. "Now we wait," Joe said, settling onto a hay bale. "Tell me about this girl of yours. Is she worth all this trouble?" Levi smiled despite his worry. "She's worth everything." At the Whispering M Ranch, Martha Dorsey sat rigidly in a chair across from Cyrus Mott's desk. Richard stood by the window, refusing to look at his wife. "I want to buy your land, Martha," Cyrus said smoothly. "The little patch by the creek." Martha shook her head. "It's not for sale. I'm offering 3 times what it's worth." He pushed a paper across the desk. $500 for scrubland that can't even support decent grazing. I said, "It's not for sale." Martha's voice was quiet, but firm. "That land belongs to my daughter now." Cyrus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you're in a difficult position. Your husband owes me a considerable sum. Your family is about to lose everything, but I can make all that go away." He leaned forward. "Sign over the land and I'll forgive Richard's debts. You keep your ranch, your home, your position in the community." Martha looked at her husband, seeing the desperation in his eyes. Once she had loved him. Once he had been a good man with dreams bigger than his ambitions. Where had that man gone? "And what about Emmeline?" she asked. "What happens to her if I sign?" Cyrus sat back. "She'll come to her senses once that boy has nothing left. He's already lost his tools, his money, his horse is dying, and their little cabin is in splinters. Soon he won't even have a barn to sleep in." The cold calculation in his voice made Martha shiver. "You did all that just because she wouldn't marry?" "You?" "I did it because no one says no to me." Cyrus's mask slipped, revealing the cruelty beneath. "Now sign the paper, Martha." She stared at the document, thinking of Emmeline standing under the cottonwoods in her simple blue dress, waiting for a wedding that wouldn't happen. Thinking of Levi, who had loved her daughter enough to leave rather than see her hurt. Slowly, deliberately, Martha tore the paper in half. "You can take our ranch," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "You can take everything we own, but you will never take that land, and you will never break my daughter's spirit." Cyrus's face darkened with rage. "You'll regret this." "Maybe." Martha stood up, suddenly feeling taller than her small frame. "But for the first time in years, I'm doing what's right instead of what's easy, and that's worth any price." The afternoon shadows lengthened as Emmeline waited under the cottonwoods. No sign of Levi, no sign of her mother. Just the quiet gurgle of the creek and the rustle of leaves overhead. She should head back to the barn, she knew. But something kept her rooted to this spot. Perhaps the stubborn hope that her wedding day could still be saved. A sound made her look up. A rider was approaching, not from the direction of town, but from the hills beyond. As he drew closer, Emmeline gasped. It was Cyrus Mott, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. Her first instinct was to run. But where? And what good would running do? This confrontation had been coming since the moment she climbed out her window, so she stood her ground, chin lifted, as Cyrus reined in his horse a few feet away. "Miss Dorsey," he said, his voice silky with false politeness. "All alone on your wedding day? How disappointing. What do you want, Mr. Mott?" She was proud that her voice didn't shake. He dismounted, removing his gloves with deliberate slowness. "I wanted to see for myself the girl who thinks she can defy me." He looked around at the broken lumber that had been their cabin. "Not much to show for your rebellion, is there? We'll rebuild, will you?" He stepped closer. "Your young man is about to lose the only thing he has left, that broken-down barn he's been living in. I bought the land yesterday. By tomorrow, he'll be homeless." Emmeline felt the blood drain from her face. "You can't do that." "I already have." Cyrus smiled coldly. "And your mother has refused to save your family's ranch. Your father will lose everything by the end of the week, all because you were too stubborn to do the sensible thing." The weight of his words pressed down on her. Everyone she loved was suffering because of her choice. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "The same thing I've always wanted." Cyrus reached out to touch her cheek and she flinched away. "Marry me, and all this stops. Your family keeps their ranch. Your mother keeps her precious scrubland. And your young man." He shrugged. "Well, he'll have to find his own way, but at least he'll have his barn." Emmeline stared at him, seeing for the first time the emptiness behind his cold eyes. This man didn't love her, he didn't even want her, not really. He just couldn't stand to lose. "And if I say no," Cyrus's face hardened, "then I'll destroy everything, and everyone you care about piece by piece, until you have nothing left but regret." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses made them both turn. It was Levi, riding double with old Joe, coming fast down the path from town. Cyrus smiled thinly. "Perfect timing. Now you can give him your answer while he watches." Levi dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, his eyes darting between Emmeline and Cyrus. "Are you all right?" he asked her, moving to her side. She nodded, though her heart was racing. "Mr. Mott was just leaving." "Actually," Cyrus said, "Miss Dorsey was about to tell me something important. Weren't you, my dear?" Emmeline looked at Levi, at his worried eyes, his hands still stained with the herbs he'd used to try to save Scout, his whole body tense with the need to protect her. She thought of her mother tearing up Cyrus's offer, choosing principle over safety. She thought of the cottonwoods that had sheltered their childhood games and would have witnessed their vows. "Yes," she said, turning back to Cyrus. "I was going to tell you that you can take everything we own. You can burn down every building and buy every piece of land, but you will never own me." Cyrus's face contorted with rage. For a moment, Emmeline thought he might strike her, but then he mastered himself, his expression smoothing into cold contempt. "You've made your choice," he said. "Remember that when you have nothing left." He mounted his horse and rode away without another word, leaving a heavy silence behind him. Levi pulled Emmeline into his arms. "Are you sure about this? He's not bluffing." "I'm sure." She looked up at him. "How's Scout?" A smile broke across Levi's face. "Better. Old Joe's herbs brought his fever down. Doc thinks he'll make it." It was one small victory in a day of defeats, but it gave Emmeline hope. "Then we still have a chance," she said, "as long as we're together." Old Joe cleared his throat. "Not to interrupt this touching moment, but I believe you two were planning a wedding today." Emmeline glanced at the setting sun. "I think we've missed our chance." "Nonsense," Joe said. "I may not be a preacher, but I've seen enough weddings to know the words. And I reckon the good Lord doesn't much care about the official paperwork when two hearts are truly joined." Levi looked at Emmeline. "What do you say?" "It's not the wedding we planned, but it's perfect," she interrupted. "All I need is you." As the last light of day filtered through the cottonwood leaves, Levi and Emmeline stood before old Joe, speaking vows that came from their hearts rather than any book. They had no rings to exchange, so Levi took a piece of string from his pocket and tied it gently around Emmeline's finger. "Done till I can get you a proper one," he promised. When Joe pronounced them husband and wife, Levi kissed Emmeline as if they had all the time in the world, as if Cyrus Mott and Richard Dorsey and all their threats were nothing but shadows that would fade with the night. But as they rode back to the barn that was now their only shelter, those shadows loomed larger than ever. Cyrus Mott had declared war, and they had nothing to fight back with except their love and determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they were husband and wife, bound by vows that no power in Whisper Creek could break. Dawn broke over Whisper Creek with the promise of another scorching day. Emmeline woke in Levi's arms, the events of yesterday rushing back, their makeshift wedding, Cyrus Mott's threats, the destruction of their hopes for a cabin on her mother's land. "Morning, Mrs. Thorne," Levi said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Despite everything, Emmeline smiled. "I like the sound of that." They dressed quickly, knowing they couldn't linger in the barn that would soon no longer be theirs. Cyrus Mott wasn't a man who made idle threats, and they needed to salvage what little they had before he took that. "We should check on Scout," Levi said as they shared the last of their food, a hard crust of bread and an apple. Emmeline nodded. "And my mother. I'm worried about her." They had just finished packing their few belongings when the sound of approaching horses made them freeze. Levi peered through a crack in the barn door. "It's Sheriff Taylor," he said, his voice tight, "and 2 of Mott's men." Emmeline's heart sank. "Already?" Levi squared his shoulders. "Let me do the talking." They stepped outside to face the 3 riders. Sheriff Taylor looked uncomfortable, not meeting their eyes. He was a decent man, but everyone knew he owed his position to Cyrus Mott's influence. "Morning, Levi, Emmeline." The sheriff cleared his throat. "I'm afraid I've got official business. This property now belongs to Mr. Mott, and he's asked me to ensure you vacate immediately." "We just need an hour to gather our things," Levi said, evenly. One of Mott's men, a burly ranch hand named Jenkins, spat on the ground. "Boss says you've had plenty of time. You're to leave now with nothing but the clothes on your backs." "That's stealing," Emmeline protested. "Everything in that barn belongs to Levi." Sheriff Taylor looked pained. "I'm sorry, Emmeline. Mr. Mott claims any possessions left on his property are now his. It's all legal." His lawyer drew up the papers. "Legal doesn't make it right," Levi said, his voice hard. Jenkins dismounted, hand resting on the gun at his hip. "You gonna cause trouble, boy? Because I'd be happy to show you what happens to folks who cross Mr. Mott." Sheriff Taylor raised a hand. "That's enough, Jenkins. There's no need for threats." He turned to Levi and Emmeline. "Please, just go peacefully. Don't make this worse than it already is." Emmeline touched Levi's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "It's not worth it," she said softly. "They're just things." After a long moment, Levi nodded. "Fine, we're going. But this isn't over." Jenkins laughed. "It's been over since you decided to steal Mott's bride." Levi's hands clenched into fists, but Emmeline's grip tightened on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "That's what they want." With as much dignity as they could muster, they walked away from the barn, leaving behind the last of their possessions. Levi's clothes, his saddle, the few books they'd saved from the ransacking. All they had were the clothes they wore and the small bundle Emmeline had packed before the sheriff arrived, containing her mother's deed and a few personal items. "Where do we go now?" she asked, as they headed toward town. Levi's face was grim. "First, we check on Scout. Then we figure out our next move." At Doc Wilson's barn, they found Scout standing in his stall, his legs still bandaged, but his eyes brighter than the day before. Old Joe was there, brushing the horse's coat. "There they are," Joe said with a smile. "The newlyweds." Levi went straight to Scout, examining his wound. "He's looking better." "Fever broke in the night," Joe confirmed. "He's going to be fine with rest. Can't say the same for you two, though. Word's all over town that Mott's men kicked you out of the barn." Emmeline sighed. "News travels fast. It's a small town," Joe said with a shrug, "and folks are watching this story play out like it's a show at the picture house." "Well, I hope they're enjoying the entertainment," Levi said bitterly. Doc Wilson entered from the back of the barn. "Don't judge them too harshly. Most people in this town are just trying to survive. Mott and your father," he nodded to Emmeline, "have made it clear that helping you means losing everything." So we're on our own, Levi said. Doc exchanged a look with Joe. Not entirely. I can keep Scout here until he's healed, and Joe's offered his cabin for you two. Your cabin? Emmeline turned to the old man in surprise. Joe shrugged. It ain't much, just a one-room shack out past Miller's Creek. But it's got a roof and 4 walls, and it's far enough from town that Mott might not bother with it. Emmeline felt tears spring to her eyes. Why would you help us when everyone else is too afraid? Because I'm too old to be scared and too stubborn to be bullied, Joe said with a wink. Besides, I've been sleeping in the stables since I started working at the Wilkinsons' ranch. Don't need the cabin anyway. It was more kindness than they dared hope for. Thank you, Levi said, his voice rough with emotion. Don't thank me yet, Joe warned. Mott's not done with you two. Not by a long shot. Martha Dorsey sat at her dressing table, staring at her reflection without seeing it. After the confrontation at the Whispering M yesterday, Richard had brought her home in stony silence. He hadn't spoken a word to her since, but his rage simmered just below the surface, ready to boil over at any moment. A knock at the bedroom door made her jump. Martha? It was Richard, his voice deceptively calm. May I come in? She steeled herself. Yes. He entered, closing the door behind him. He'd shaved and dressed in his best suit, as if preparing for an important meeting. I've been thinking about... Yesterday, he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. About what you did. Martha remained silent, waiting. You humiliated me in front of Cyrus Mott. You defied me about that worthless piece of land. And because of your stubbornness, we're going to lose everything. I did what I thought was right, Martha said quietly. Richard's laugh was harsh. Right? What's right about watching our daughter throw her life away on a penniless nobody? What's right about losing the ranch that's been in my family for 3 generations? Some things are more important than land or money, Richard. Easy for you to say, he snapped. You didn't build this place. You don't understand what it means. Martha looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. I understand that you've forgotten what's truly valuable. You used to be a kind man, Richard. You used to laugh. When did you become so bitter that you'd sacrifice your own daughter's happiness? For a moment, something flickered in Richard's eyes, a glimpse of the man he'd once been. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Mott's offered me one last chance, he said, standing up. He'll still forgive my debts if I can deliver Emmeline to him. And he wants your land. Martha felt cold fear wash over her. I've already told you. I know what you said, Richard interrupted. But things have changed. Sheriff Taylor came by this morning. Apparently our daughter got herself married yesterday. Some makeshift ceremony with no preacher and no license. They're married. Martha's heart leapt. Thank God. Richard's expression darkened. It's not legal, and Mott doesn't care anyway. He still wants her. He straightened his tie in the mirror. I'm going to find her and bring her home, then we'll sort this mess out once and for all. Richard, please. But he was already heading for the door. Stay here, he ordered. I don't trust you not to warn her. As the door closed behind him, Martha rushed to the window. She watched her husband mount his horse and ride toward town, his back rigid with determination. She had to get to Emmeline first. But how? Richard had ordered the stable hands not to saddle a horse for her, and she wasn't strong enough to do it herself. Then her gaze fell on the old buggy in the carriage house. It hadn't been used in years, but it might still be serviceable. And old Daisy, the gentle mare they kept for light work, wouldn't need saddling. With new resolve, Martha hurried to change into a simpler dress. Her daughter needed her, and this time she wouldn't fail her. Joe's cabin was indeed small. Just a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and little else. But it was clean and solid, tucked away in a grove of pines that provided shade and privacy. It's perfect, Emmeline said as they stepped inside. After the events of the past few days, any safe haven seemed like a palace. Levi set down their meager belongings, the small bundle Emmeline had managed to save, plus a few supplies Doc Wilson had given them. It'll do until we can rebuild on your mother's land. Do you think that's still possible? Emmeline asked, the doubt creeping into her voice. Levi took her hands. I made you a promise yesterday. to love and protect you, for better or worse. I intend to keep that promise, which means I'm not giving up on our home." She squeezed his hands. "Neither am I." They spent the afternoon making the cabin livable, sweeping out dust, bringing in fresh pine boughs for bedding, starting a small fire to drive away the dampness. It was simple work, but it gave them purpose after days of having everything taken from them. As evening approached, Levi went to the creek to catch fish for their supper. Emmeline stayed behind to tend the fire, humming softly as she worked. Despite everything, there was a strange contentment in this quiet moment, in knowing that they were together, husband and wife, making a life with their own hands. The sound of an approaching buggy broke the silence. Emmeline froze, then carefully peered out the small window. "Mama!" she cried, rushing outside as she recognized Martha in the old Dorsey buggy. Martha climbed down as quickly as her skirts would allow, embracing her daughter tightly. "Thank God I found you. Joe told me where to look." "What's wrong?" Emmeline asked, noting her mother's anxious expression. "Your father knows about the wedding. He's looking for you and he's determined to bring you back. Cyrus Mott has offered him one last chance to save the ranch." Emmeline's blood ran cold. "I'm not going back. I'm married to Levi now." "I know, darling, but your father says the marriage isn't legal without a license and a proper ceremony." Martha glanced around nervously. "Where's Levi?" "Fishing at the creek. He'll be back soon." Martha took her daughter's hands. "Listen to me. Your father is desperate. I've never seen him like this. I'm afraid of what he might do. He can't force me to marry Cyrus Mott," Emmeline insisted. "No, but he can make life impossible for you and Levi." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I should have stood up to him years ago. Maybe then it wouldn't have come to this." "It's not your fault, Mama." Martha straightened her shoulders. "Well, I'm standing up now. I've brought something for you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I signed the deed over to you officially. The land is yours now, completely legal. Richard can't touch it and neither can Cyrus Mott." Emmeline took the paper with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "There's more," Martha continued. "I spoke with Judge Wilson this morning, Doc's brother. He says your marriage can be made legal if you sign the proper papers. He's willing to do it discreetly." "Mama, this is what I should have done from the beginning," Martha finished for her. "Now, we need to hurry. Your father could be here any minute if he followed me." As if summoned by her words, the sound of galloping hooves cut through the evening air. Richard Dorsey rode into the clearing, his face like thunder. "I thought I'd find you here," he said to Martha, dismounting. "Consorting with our disobedient daughter." Emmeline stepped in front of her mother. "Leave her alone, Daddy. This is between you and me." Richard's gaze hardened as it fell on her. "You've disgraced this family, running away, living in sin with that stable boy." "He's my husband," Emmeline interrupted. "And his name is Levi. A makeshift ceremony under the trees isn't a marriage," Richard scoffed, "and it won't stand up when Cyrus Mott takes you to court." "Court?" Martha gasped. "What are you talking about?" Richard smiled thinly. "Mott's lawyer has drawn up papers claiming breach of promise. He says Emmeline agreed to marry him and then ran away, causing him public humiliation and emotional distress." "That's a lie," Emmeline cried. "I never agreed to anything." "Your word against his," Richard said with a shrug. "And in this town, whose word do you think will carry more weight? The richest man in the county or a girl who ran away with a horsebreaker?" Martha stepped forward. "You can't let him do this, Richard. She's your daughter." "My daughter died the day she climbed out her window and brought shame on our name," Richard said coldly. "Now I have one chance to save what's left of my family's legacy, and I'm taking it." He reached for Emmeline's arm, but she backed away. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "You don't have a choice," Richard growled. "Mott's men are combing the hills looking for you. If I don't bring you back, they will, and they won't be gentle about it. Is your pride worth more than your daughter's?" "Happiness?" Martha demanded, her voice rising. "Is this ranch worth more than her future?" Richard turned on his wife. "Don't talk to me about worth. You've never understood what it means to build something, to have a legacy. All you've done is undermine me at every turn." "That's not true," Martha said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I loved you, Richard. I stood by you through drought and hardship. I gave you a daughter to be proud of, but somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing us as people and started seeing us as possessions." Richard's face flushed with anger. "I don't have time for this." He grabbed Emmeline's wrist. "You're coming with me now." "Let her go." Levi stood at the edge of the clearing, a string of fish in one hand, his face set in hard lines. Richard turned, still gripping Emmeline's wrist. "Stay out of this, boy. This doesn't concern you." "My wife concerns me," Levi said, dropping the fish and stepping forward. "Let her go." Richard's laugh was ugly. "Your wife? You think playing house makes her your wife? Mott's going to tear your little fantasy apart in court, and then where will you be?" "In court or out of it, Emmeline is my wife," Levi said, his voice steady, "and I won't let you drag her back to be sold to Cyrus Mott." Richard's face contorted with rage. "You insolent—" He released Emmeline's wrist to lunge at Levi, but Levi was younger and quicker. He sidestepped Richard's charge, sending the older man stumbling. "Stop it!" Emmeline cried. "Both of you!" Richard regained his balance, his eyes wild with fury. "You've turned my own daughter against me," he snarled. "You've poisoned my wife's mind. You've ruined everything." He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a revolver. Martha screamed, "Richard, no!" Everything seemed to slow down. Richard pointing the gun at Levi, Martha rushing forward, Emmeline frozen in horror. "Put the gun down, Dorsey!" The new voice came from the trees. Sheriff Taylor stepped into the clearing, his own weapon drawn. "This doesn't involve you, Sheriff," Richard said, the gun still aimed at Levi. "A man pulling a gun makes it my business," the sheriff replied calmly. "Now put it down before someone gets hurt." For a terrible moment, Richard seemed to consider firing anyway. Then slowly, he lowered the weapon. Sheriff Taylor approached, cautiously taking the gun from Richard's unresisting hand. "Now what's all this about?" "I was trying to take my daughter back to Cyrus Mott against her will," Martha said, her voice shaking. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Dorsey, I understand you're upset about your daughter's situation, but pulling a gun isn't the answer." "What are you doing here anyway?" Richard demanded. "This is family business." "Got a tip that there might be trouble," the sheriff admitted, "and I'm glad I followed up on it." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Mott sent you, didn't he? To make sure I brought her back." The sheriff didn't deny it. "Mr. Mott has concerns about his arrangement with your daughter." "There is no arrangement," Emmeline said firmly. "I never agreed to marry him." Sheriff Taylor sighed. "Look, I'm trying to keep the peace here. Mr. Mott has a lot of influence in this town, but that doesn't give anyone the right to use force." He turned to Levi and Emmeline. "That said, he's filed papers claiming breach of promise, and he's got witnesses who say there was an understanding between him and Miss Dorsey." "Mrs. Thorne," Levi corrected, "and any understanding was between Mott and her father, not Emmeline." The sheriff rubbed his forehead wearily. "This is going to get messy. Mr. Mott doesn't like to lose, and he's got the law on his side in more ways than one." "Not all the law," Martha said suddenly. She pulled out another folded paper from her pocket. "Judge Wilson gave me this. It's a marriage license already signed by him. All it needs are Levi and Emmeline's signatures to make their marriage legal and binding." Richard lunged for the paper, but the sheriff stepped between them. "That's enough, Mr. Dorsey. I think you should go home and cool off." "This isn't over," Richard spat. "Mott will hear about this." "I imagine he will," the sheriff agreed. "But for tonight, everyone's going home safe." He handed Richard's gun back to him, empty of bullets. "I'll keep these for now." With a final glare at his wife and daughter, Richard stomped back to his horse and rode away, his back rigid with fury. The sheriff turned to the others. "I'd sign that license quick if I were you. Mott's not going to stop just because his plan hit a snag." Emmeline looked at him in surprise. "You're helping us?" Sheriff Taylor's expression softened. "I've known you since you were a little girl, Emmy, and I knew your grandfather before he passed. He wouldn't approve of what your father's trying to do." He looked uncomfortable. "I have to work with Mott. This town doesn't give me much choice, but that doesn't mean I have to help him bully a young woman into marriage." Martha squeezed his arm gratefully. "Thank you, Frank." He nodded, then turned to leave. "Sign that paper tonight and get it back to Judge Wilson first thing tomorrow. And be careful. Mott's men are still out looking for you." After he'd gone, The three of them stood in stunned silence for a moment. "Well," Levi said finally, "it seems we're getting married again." Despite everything, Emmeline laughed. "Third time's the charm?" Inside the cabin, by the light of the single oil lamp, Levi and Emmeline signed the marriage license with Martha as witness. It was a simple thing, just names and dates on paper, but it felt monumental. "There," Martha said as she added her own signature. "Now it's legal and binding. Cyrus Mott can file all the breach of promise suits he wants, but he can't undo a legal marriage." Emmeline hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you, Mama, for everything." "I should have stood up for you sooner," Martha said, stroking her daughter's hair. "I let fear rule me for too long." "You're standing up now," Levi said. "That's what matters." Martha nodded, then glanced at the darkening sky through the window. "I should go. It's getting late, and I don't want to travel these roads in full dark." "You could stay," Emmeline offered, though the tiny cabin barely had room for two. "No, I need to go back." Martha's face was resolute. "Someone has to make your father see reason, and I'm the only one who can try." After she left, Levi and Emmeline prepared a simple supper from the fish he'd caught. They ate in comfortable silence, both processing the day's events. "Do you think it's over?" Emmeline asked as they washed the plates in a basin of creek water. Levi shook his head. "No. Your father's pride is wounded, and Cyrus Mott isn't a man who gives up easily. But we're legally married now. He can't force me to marry him." "No. But he can make our lives very difficult." Levi dried his hands on a cloth. "We still need to rebuild on your land, and we have no money, no supplies. Mott controls most of the businesses in town, and he's made it clear no one's to help us." Emmeline's face fell. "So what do we do?" Levi pulled her close. "We take it one day at a time. Tomorrow we'll go to town and file the license with Judge Wilson. Then we'll check on Scout and see if he's well enough to move here. And then we start rebuilding. Even if we have to cut every tree ourselves and haul it by hand." She rested her head against his chest, taking comfort in the steady beat of his heart. "At least we're together," she whispered. "That's more than we had a week ago." Cyrus Mott was not a man accustomed to waiting. He paced the study of the Whispering M Ranch, a glass of brandy forgotten on his desk, his face dark with impatience. A knock at the door brought him up short. "Enter." Jenkins, his foreman, stepped inside, hat in hand. "We've searched the hills, boss, no sign of them." "Incompetent fools," Mott muttered. "How hard can it be to find two people in a town this size?" "Well, folks are helping them hide," Jenkins said. "And the sheriff's been acting strange, almost like he's protecting them." Mott's eyes narrowed. "Taylor, after everything I've done for him." "Yes, sir. And there's more. Word is, Martha Dorsey got them a legal marriage license from Judge Wilson. They're planning to file it tomorrow." The glass shattered in Mott's hand, sending brandy and shards across the expensive carpet. Jenkins jumped back, startled. "Sir? Your hand—" "Get out," Mott said, his voice deathly quiet. "But you're cut. Get out." When Jenkins had fled, Mott stared at the blood dripping from his palm with detached interest. The pain was nothing compared to the rage building inside him. Legal marriage. That changed things. His breach of promise suit would be worthless once the license was filed. He'd been outmaneuvered by a slip of a girl and a penniless horsebreaker. The thought was intolerable. Wrapping a handkerchief around his bleeding hand, Mott crossed to his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. It was time for more drastic measures. If he couldn't have Emmeline Dorsey, he would make sure no one else could build a life with her in Whisper Creek, starting with that piece of land by the creek. Dawn brought a tentative hope to the small cabin in the pines. Levi and Emmeline rose early, determined to file their marriage license before anything else could go wrong. "We should stop by Doc Wilson's on the way back," Levi said as they walked toward town. "Check on Scout and see when he might be well. Enough to move." Emmeline nodded, enjoying the simple pleasure of walking hand in hand with her husband in the morning light. For a moment, it was possible to believe that everything might work out after all. The town was just waking up as they reached the main street. A few shopkeepers were sweeping their porches, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Under normal circumstances, they might have stopped for a warm roll, but they had no money to spare. Judge Wilson's office was above the bank, A small room with a desk and a few chairs, dusty law books lining the walls. The judge himself was a tall, thin man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Ah, the newlyweds," he said as they entered. "Martha told me to expect you this morning." "We have the license," Emmeline said, handing him the signed document. The judge examined it carefully, then nodded. "Everything appears to be in order. I'll file this immediately." He looked up at them over his glasses. "I understand Cyrus Mott has been making things difficult for you." Levi gave a short laugh. "That's one way to put it. Well, this should stop any talk of breach of promise," the judge said, putting the license in a folder. "But I wouldn't underestimate Mott's determination. He's not a man who takes defeat gracefully." "We know," Emmeline said, "but at least now we're legally protected." The judge's expression was grave. "The law can only do so much, my dear, especially in a town where one man holds so much power." They thanked him and left, both sobered by his warning. Outside, they nearly collided with Richard Dorsey coming. "Go up the steps." "Daddy?" Emmeline said, startled. Richard looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept. He glanced between them, his expression unreadable. "Is it done?" he asked gruffly. "The license?" Levi nodded, putting a protective arm around Emmeline's shoulders. "Yes, it's filed." Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then, to their surprise, he simply nodded. "Good." "Good?" Emmeline echoed, confused. "Your mother wouldn't stop talking all night," Richard said, rubbing his forehead. "Made me see some things I've been blind to." "Like what?" Emmeline asked warily. Richard looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in years. "Like how much you remind me of her when she was young, before I—" He trailed off, then straightened. "Anyway, it's done now. You've made your choice." He turned to go, then paused. "Be careful. Mott was in a rage when I saw him last night. He's not finished with this." Before they could respond, he continued up the steps and disappeared into the judge's office. "What was that about?" Levi wondered. Emmeline shook her head, equally puzzled. "I don't know, but it almost sounded like he's accepted our marriage. Maybe your mother got through to him after all." They continued toward Doc Wilson's, both trying to make sense of Richard's strange behavior. The morning sun was higher now, promising another scorching day. As they passed the general store, Mrs. Peterson stepped outside, a small package in her hands. "Emmeline," she called softly, glancing nervously up and down the street. "A moment, please." They approached cautiously. Mrs. Peterson had been one of those who'd refused to sell to them after Mott's threats. "I'm sorry about before. The older woman said, pressing the package into Emmeline's hands. "I was afraid of losing the store. It's all George and I have." "I understand," Emmeline assured her. "It's not much," Mrs. Peterson continued, "but there's some flour and coffee, a bit of salt pork, things to get you started." Emmeline's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." "Best hide it in your skirts," Mrs. Peterson advised, glancing around again. "Mott's men are watching the store." As they walked away, the small package hidden in the folds of Emmeline's dress, Levi squeezed her hand. "Seems like not everyone's abandoned us after all." Their spirits lifted. They continued to Doc Wilson's barn. Scout greeted them with a soft nickering, looking stronger than the day before. "He's healing well," Doc confirmed after examining the wound. "Another week and he should be fit to move, though I wouldn't ride him hard for a while after that." "That's wonderful news," Emmeline said, stroking the horse's nose. "And there's more," Doc added. "Old Joe came by this morning, said to tell you he's rounded up a few supplies for rebuilding your cabin. Nothing fancy, but enough to get started. He's storing them out by your land." Levi looked stunned. "How did he manage that with Mott watching everything?" Doc smiled. "Joe's been around a long time. He knows ways of getting things done without drawing attention." For the first time in days, Emmeline felt a surge of real hope. "So we can start rebuilding today?" "I'd wait until dusk," Doc advised. "Less chance of being spotted. But yes, you can start." They left the barn with lighter hearts, the future looking brighter than it had since the night Emmeline climbed out her window. But as they reached the edge of town, a commotion up ahead made them pause. A crowd had gathered around the notice board outside the town hall. People were talking in excited, worried voices. "What's happening?" Levi asked a passerby. The man gave them a pitying look. Mott's posted a notice. He's damming the creek that runs through his property. The same creek that feeds your land. Emmeline's heart sank. But that will dry up your creek completely, the man finished for her. By the end of summer, that land will be worthless. The hope they'd felt moments before evaporated like morning dew under the harsh sun. Without water, the land was useless. They couldn't build a home, grow crops, or raise animals. Can he do that? Levi asked, his voice tight. He owns the land upstream, the man shrugged, and he's got the money to fight any legal challenges. Emmeline felt as if the ground were shifting beneath her feet. Just when they'd thought they were making progress, Cyrus Mott had found a new way to destroy their dreams. "Let's see this notice for ourselves," Levi said grimly, taking her hand. They pushed through the crowd to the notice board. There it was, official-looking with Mott's signature at the bottom. Notice of intent to construct a dam on Whisper Creek, commencing immediately. "He can't do this," Emmeline whispered. "That creek has never run dry, not in living memory. People downstream depend on it." "That's the worst part," said a woman nearby. "He's offering to provide water rights to everyone affected. Everyone except the owners of the old Harker scrubland." The old Harker scrubland, Martha's land, now Emmeline's, named for her mother's family before she became a Dorsey. "He's targeting us specifically," Levi realized, "making sure we can't use that land." Emmeline felt a surge of anger unlike anything she'd experienced before. "This isn't about business anymore. This is pure spite." "What do we do now?" Levi asked quietly. Emmeline stared at the notice, her mind racing. Then, decision made, she turned to him. "We fight back, starting now." The determination in her voice matched the fire in her eyes. Cyrus Mott had pushed her to the edge, and instead of breaking, she'd found a strength she didn't know she possessed. It was time to show him, and all of Whisper Creek, that she was more than just a Dorsey name. She was Emmeline Thorne now, and she wasn't going to let anyone take away her future without a fight. The sun was setting over Whisper Creek, painting the hills in shades of gold and crimson. In the small cabin in the pines, Levi and Emmeline sat at the rough table, talking in low, urgent voices. The rising sun painted the hills of Whisper Creek in golden light as Levi and Emmeline made their way toward their land by the creek. They had spent a restless night in Joe's cabin, both too consumed with worry about Cyrus Mott's dam to sleep well. "I still can't believe he'd go this far," Emmeline said, her voice tight with anger. "Damming up the creek just to spite us." Levi took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "Judge Wilson says we might have a case based on riparian rights. The creek has flowed through that land for generations. Mott can't just cut it off on a whim, but a lawsuit would take time and money, neither of which we have." Emmeline's shoulders slumped. "And in the meantime, the creek will dry up." "We'll figure something out," Levi promised, though his own confidence was wavering. "We haven't come this far to give up now." When they crested the last hill and the creek land came into view, they stopped short. A group of men was already there, unloading lumber and tools from several wagons. "What on earth?" Emmeline breathed. Old Joe stepped away from the group, waving when he spotted them. "About time you two showed up. We've been waiting since dawn." They hurried down the slope. As they drew closer, Emmeline recognized many of the faces, townsfolk who had helped build their cabin before Mott's threats had scared them away. Mr. Grayson, Tom Harper the blacksmith, several ranch hands she'd known since childhood. "What's going on?" Levi asked, looking from face to face. "We're rebuilding your cabin," Joe said simply, "and we're doing it before Mott can dam that creek." Emmeline felt tears spring to her eyes. "But Mott's threats, your businesses, your livelihoods." "Tom." Harper stepped forward. His massive blacksmith's arms crossed over his chest. "Some things are more important than business, girl. We should have stood by you from the start. We've been cowards long enough," added Mrs. Peterson, who was arranging food on a makeshift table with several other women. "This town doesn't belong to Cyrus Mott, no matter what he thinks." Levi shook his head in disbelief. "What changed?" "Your father, for one thing," Joe said to Emmeline, "came by the stables last night, talking to anyone who'd listen about how Mott's gone too far. Said, damming the creek wasn't just hurting you two, but the whole town." "My father said that." Emmeline couldn't hide her shock. "Hard to believe, I know, but something's changed in the man." Joe gave her a knowing look. Martha's influence, I'd wager. That woman's finally found her voice again, and Richard Dorsey's learning to listen. Before she could process this, Mr. Grayson called out, "Enough talking. We've got a cabin to build before Mott's men figure out what we're up to." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Men hammered and sawed, women brought food and water. Children ran errands and held tools. By noon, the frame was up, larger than before, with space for a proper bedroom and a kitchen. Emmeline worked alongside everyone, her heart swelling with each nail driven, each board placed. These people, her neighbors, her community, were risking Mott's wrath to help them. It was a gift beyond measure. As she brought water to the workers, she spotted a familiar figure approaching on horseback. Her father, Richard Dorsey, dismounted, at the edge of the activity, looking uncomfortable as all eyes turned to him. Emmeline walked over, unsure what to expect. "Daddy," she said cautiously. Richard cleared his throat. "Quite a turnout you've got here." "Yes, it seems the town hasn't forgotten how to come together when it matters." He nodded, his eyes scanning the half-built cabin. "It's good work. Solid." After a pause, he added, "Your mother wanted to come, but she's not feeling well this morning." Concern flooded Emmeline. "Is she all right?" "Just tired. Been a lot of long nights lately." Richard's face softened slightly. "She hasn't stopped talking about you, you know. How proud she is of the stand you've taken." Emmeline waited, sensing there was more. Richard shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with what he had to say next. "I've been doing some thinking about Mott, about the ranch, about..." He hesitated. "About you. And I was wrong." The words seemed to cost him dearly. "Wrong to try to force you to marry a man you didn't love. Wrong to choose land over my own daughter's happiness." Emmeline stared at him, speechless. "Don't look so shocked," he said with a hint of his old gruffness. "Even a stubborn old fool like me can see reason eventually, especially when your mother won't let me sleep until I do." "What about the ranch?" Emmeline asked. "Your debts to Mott?" Richard's jaw tightened. "Let him take it. It's just land. When all's said and done, the Dorseys built it once. We can build again." His eyes met hers. "If you'll have us, that is." Tears welled in Emmeline's eyes. "Of course we will." "Good." Richard cleared his throat again. "Now, where's that husband of yours? I've got some experience with cabin building that might be useful." By mid-afternoon, the walls were up, and work on the roof had begun. The atmosphere was almost festive, with children playing by the creek and women chatting as they prepared a communal meal. The peace was shattered by the thunder of approaching hooves. Cyrus Mott rode into the clearing, followed by Jenkins and 4 other men, all armed. The workers froze, hammers mid-swing. Saws paused in their cutting. Only Richard Dorsey stepped forward, positioning himself between Mott and the half-built. "Cabin? Quite a gathering you've got here, Dorsey," Mott said, his voice cold. "Especially for a man about to lose his ranch." "That's my business," Richard replied evenly. "This," he gestured to the building site, "is my daughter's business, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave her be." Mott's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Richard. I could still forgive your debts." "At what price? My daughter's happiness? Not worth it. Then you're a fool." Mott turned his attention to the crowd. "And the rest of you? Have you forgotten who owns this town? Who keeps your businesses afloat? Who buys your goods and pays your wages?" Tom Harper stepped forward, his blacksmith's hammer still in hand. "We haven't forgotten anything, Mott, including the fact that Whisper Creek existed before you came, and it'll exist after you're gone." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mott's face darkened with rage. "This is private property," he snapped. "You're all trespassing." "No, they're not," Emmeline said, moving to stand beside her father. "This land belongs to me legally, deeded by my mother, and these people are here at my invitation." "A worthless piece of scrubland won't do you much good without water," Mott sneered. "My dam goes up tomorrow." "Actually," called a new voice, "it doesn't." Judge Wilson rode into the clearing, a folded paper in his hand. He nodded to Emmeline and Levi before addressing Mott. "I've just received word from the County Water Commissioner. Your request to dam Whisper Creek has been denied." He held up the paper. "This creek is classified as a natural waterway serving multiple properties. You can't impede its flow without the consent of all affected landowners. Mott's face contorted with fury. This is your doing, isn't it, Wilson? You and your brother always meddling in my affairs. I simply pointed Mrs. Thorne in the right direction, the judge replied calmly. The water commissioner made his own decision based on the law, something you might want to familiarize yourself with. The law, Mott spat. The law can be changed when you have enough money. Perhaps, Judge Wilson conceded, but not today, and not in time to stop this cabin from being built. He looked around at the gathered townspeople. It seems Whisper Creek has remembered what community means. Mott's hand moved to his gun, but Jenkins caught his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. Too many witnesses, too many honest citizens watching. Even Mott couldn't shoot his way out. Of this situation, this isn't over, he said through clenched teeth. Actually, I think it is, said Richard Dorsey. You'll get your money, Mott. I'm selling the east pasture to the Wilkinsons. It's enough to cover what I owe you with interest. I don't want your money, Mott hissed. I want what you can't have, Emmeline interrupted. My land, my husband, my future. None of it is for sale at any price. For a long moment, Mott stared at her, hatred burning in his eyes. Then, without another word, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men following. A cheer went up from the crowd, and the work resumed with renewed energy. Emmeline felt Levi's arm slip around her waist. I think we just won, he said softly. She leaned against him, watching as her father picked up a hammer and joined the men working on the roof. For now, Mott won't give up easily. No, Levi agreed, but neither will we. The cabin was finished. As the sun began to set, a miracle of community effort. It wasn't fancy, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, sturdy walls, and a solid roof. But to Emmeline, it was more beautiful than any mansion. The townsfolk gathered for a celebratory meal, sharing food and stories as darkness fell. Lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the gathering. There was laughter, something that had been all too rare in Whisper Creek lately. As the evening wore on, people began to drift away, heading home with promises to return tomorrow to help with the finishing touches. Soon, only Levi, Emmeline, and Richard remained. I should go check on your mother, Richard said, looking more relaxed than Emmeline had seen him in years. She'll want to hear about everything. Tell her to come see it tomorrow, Emmeline said. It's her land after all. She should see what it's become. Richard nodded. I will. He hesitated, then added awkwardly, You did good, Emmy. Both of you. His eyes flickered to Levi. You've got more courage than I gave you credit for. Thank you, Levi said simply. With a nod, Richard mounted his horse and rode away, leaving them alone in their new home. I can hardly believe it, Emmeline said, looking around the cabin. Yesterday we had nothing, and now we have everything that matters, Levi finished for her. He took her hands in his. A home, each other, and a whole town standing. With us, she smiled up at him. I was so afraid when I climbed out that window, afraid of leaving everything I knew, afraid of what might happen. And now? Now I'm not afraid of anything, not as long as we're together. He pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and relief and hope that had been building since that night she'd knocked on his barn door. I wanted you before you had a name that mattered, he reminded her softly. But the name you have now, Emmeline Thorne, that's the one that matters most to me. A week later, Martha Dorsey sat on the porch of the creek cabin, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. Her health had improved enough for a visit, and she'd spent the day helping Emmeline arrange their few possessions in their new home. It's perfect, she said, breathing in the scent of pine and wildflowers. Everything I imagined when I bought this land all those years ago. Emmeline sat beside her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. I can't thank you enough, Mama, for the land, for standing up to Daddy, for everything. No thanks needed. Martha stroked her daughter's hair. Seeing you happy, seeing you fight for what you want, that's all the thanks I need. Inside the cabin, they could hear Levi and Richard talking as they finished installing a shelf. The 2 men had formed an uneasy truce that was slowly warming into something like respect. Your father's changing, Martha observed. Losing the ranch was a blow, but in some ways I think it's freed him. He's remembering who he was before the drought, before the debts. Will you be all right? Living in town? The Dorseys had moved to a small house in Whisper Creek after selling most of their land to cover Mott's loans. We'll be fine, Martha assured her. Your father's talking about opening a store. Says it's time Whisper Creek had some competition for Mott's businesses. Emmeline smiled. I never thought I'd see the day. Life has a way of surprising us. Martha took her daughter's hand. Speaking of surprises, have you told Levi yet? Emmeline blushed. Not yet, I wanted to be sure. And are you? Sure? Emmeline nodded, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. The signs are all there. Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. Martha's eyes filled with tears of joy. A baby. Oh, Emmy. I'm going to tell Levi tonight, Emmeline whispered. After you and Daddy leave. He'll be overjoyed. Martha squeezed her hand. A new life in your new home. It's everything I ever wanted for you. The cabin door opened and Richard stepped out, followed by Levi. Both men looked pleased with themselves. Shelves. Up, Richard announced. Solid enough to hold whatever you need to put on it. Thank you, Daddy, Emmeline said, making room for Levi to sit beside her. Richard helped Martha to her feet. We should head back before it gets dark. Plenty of time. To visit tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, Martha hugged her daughter close. Tell him, she whispered in Emmeline's ear. Don't wait. After waving goodbye to her parents, Emmeline turned to find Levi watching her with a curious expression. Tell me what? He asked. She smiled, taking his hands and placing them gently on her stomach. We're going to need that shelf for baby things and maybe another room eventually. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. We're going to have a baby, she confirmed, her heart swelling at the joy that spread across his face. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as laughter, pure, unrestrained happiness, burst from him. A baby! Our baby! Our future, Emmeline corrected once he set her down again. Our family, our legacy. They stood together on the porch of their small cabin, arms around each other, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The creek bubbled peacefully nearby, its flow unimpeded by Mott's threats. In the distance, the lights of Whisper Creek twinkled like earthbound stars. I used to think my name was too heavy, Emmeline said softly. The weight of being a Dorsey, of all those expectations. And now? She looked up at the man she loved, the father of her child, the partner who had risked everything for her. Now I know the only weight that matters is the one we choose to carry together. Cyrus Mott sat alone in his study at the Whispering M, a glass of brandy untouched before him. The room was dark except for the dying embers in the fireplace, casting long shadows across the expensive furnishings. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Enter, he called. Jenkins stepped in, hat in hand. Sir, the men are asking about tomorrow's work. Do we continue clearing land for the dam, or... There will be no dam, Mott cut him off. The water commissioner has made his decision. Yes, sir. Jenkins hesitated. And what about the thorns? Do we still keep an eye on them? Mott swirled, the brandy in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the firelight. For now we wait. Whisper Creek may think they've won, but they'll learn. This town doesn't run without Cyrus Mott. What are you planning, sir? A cold smile spread across Mott's face. Patience, Jenkins. The best revenge requires careful planning. He set down his glass. Dorsey's paid his debts, so that avenue is closed, but there are other ways to make life difficult for those who cross me. Sir, enough. You have your orders. Dismissed. After Jenkins left, Mott rose and crossed to the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of his ranch, his town, his domain. He'd built his empire from nothing, taking what he wanted, crushing those who stood in his way. One small patch of land, one stubborn girl and her horse-breaking husband. Wouldn't change that. Couldn't change that. But as he stood there in the darkness, an unfamiliar sensation crept over him, a hollow emptiness that all his wealth and power couldn't seem to fill. For the first time in years, Cyrus Mott felt the cold truth he'd been, running from he was alone. Feared, yes, respected perhaps, but not loved, never loved. He pushed the thought away, hardening his heart once more. Love was weakness. Power was the only currency that mattered in this world. And yet the image of Emmeline Dorsey, no, Emmeline Thorne now, standing defiant before him, surrounded by the people of Whisper Creek, refused to fade from his mind. She had something he could never buy, never take, never own. And that perhaps was the cruelest defeat of all. Spring arrived in Whisper Creek, painting the hills with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of new growth. The creek ran clear and strong past the Thorne cabin, which had expanded over the winter to include a proper barn for Scout and the 2 mares Levi had bought with his earnings from breaking horses for neighboring ranches. Emmeline stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching as Levi worked with a spirited colt in the small corral they'd built. Her husband had a gift with horses, a patience and gentleness that earned their trust, much as it had earned hers. "He's going to be a fine one," called Martha, who had come to spend the day helping Emmeline prepare for the baby's arrival. "Strong bloodlines in that colt," Emmeline smiled. "Levi says he's the best he's ever worked with. The Wilkinsons want to breed him next year. Your father says Levi could start his own breeding operation soon, with the reputation he's building." Martha joined her daughter at the door. "Richard's quite impressed, though he'd never admit it outright." "Daddy's changed so much these past months," Emmeline marveled. "His store is doing well. He's standing up to Mott in town council meetings, and yesterday I actually heard him laugh." Martha's eyes crinkled with happiness. "He's remembering who he was before fear took over. We both are." Inside the cabin, everything was ready for the baby, due to arrive within weeks. A cradle crafted by Tom Harper stood in the corner of the bedroom, filled with soft blankets sewn by the women of Whisper Creek. A chest held tiny clothes, many of them gifts from townsfolk who had once been too afraid to even speak to the Thornes. Mott had tried to maintain his hold on the town, but something had shifted. His threats held less power now that people had seen they could stand together. His businesses still operated, but they no longer had a monopoly. Richard Dorsey's general store offered fair prices and treated customers with respect, a stark contrast to Mott's establishments. There were still those who feared him, still those who depended on his good graces. But his kingdom was shrinking, day by day. "Have you decided on names yet?" Martha asked, helping Emmeline to a chair as the baby gave a particularly energetic kick. "Joseph Richard for a boy after old Joe and Daddy," Emmeline said, settling into the cushioned seat, and Martha rose for a girl. Tears welled in Martha's eyes. "Oh, Emmy, I'd be honored." The sound of hoofbeats made them both look up. Sheriff Taylor was riding toward the cabin, his expression grave. Emmeline felt a flutter of concern. "I wonder what's happened." Levi noticed the sheriff too and left the colt to meet him at the fence. They spoke briefly before both men headed toward the cabin. "Afternoon, ladies," Sheriff Taylor said, removing his hat. "Sorry to disturb you." "Is everything all right, Frank?" Martha asked. The sheriff exchanged a look with Levi before answering. "There's been an incident in town. Cyrus Mott's dead." Emmeline gasped. "Dead? How?" Hart gave out, according to Doc Wilson. "Found him this morning in his study. Been dead since sometime last night." A strange silence fell over them as they absorbed the news. Cyrus Mott, the man who had loomed so large over their lives, gone just like that. "What happens now?" Levi asked. "To the Whispering M? To his businesses?" Sheriff Taylor shrugged. "That's the thing. No one knows. Mott had no family, no will that anyone can find. His lawyer's sending for some cousin back east, but who knows if they'll even come. The ranch hands are already talking about leaving," he continued. "Without Mott's iron hand, things are falling apart fast." After the sheriff left, promising to bring any news, Emmeline sat in thoughtful silence, her hand resting on her belly. "I can't believe he's gone," she said finally. "After everything he did, all the threats, all the schemes, just gone." Levi knelt beside her chair. "How do you feel about it?" She considered the question carefully. "I don't feel joy, if that's what you're asking. No one should die alone and bitter like that. But I don't feel sorrow either." She met his eyes. "Mostly, I feel free. Like a shadow's been lifted. I understand. He covered her hand with his own, feeling their child move beneath their joined fingers. What matters now is this, our family, our future. Martha rose quietly, sensing they needed a moment alone. I'll go check on that colt, she said, slipping outside. When she was gone, Emmeline leaned forward to rest her forehead against Levi's. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't climbed out that window that night? If I'd just done what my father wanted? Sometimes, he admitted. But then I remember something my father told me once. He said life's path isn't one straight road. It's made up of all the choices we make, big and small, that lead us exactly where we're meant to be. And where is that? She asked softly. Levi smiled, his eyes full of love. Right here, with you. Building something that will last long after we're gone. Outside, the creek flowed steadily past their land, as it had for generations and would for generations to come. The cabin stood solid on the ground where they had once built willow forts as children, and within Emmeline, new life grew, the continuation of a story that had begun the moment she chose to forge her own path. The weight of her name, Dorsey or Thorne, no longer felt like a burden. It was a mantle she wore with pride, a legacy she would pass on to her child. Not of wealth or status, but of courage, of love, of the strength to stand firm in the face of those who would try to break you. As the sun began to set over Whisper Creek, casting long golden rays across the land they had fought so hard to keep, Emmeline and Levi stood together on their porch, arms around each other, watching the light paint their small corner of the world in shades of promise. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. And whatever it held, joy or sorrow, triumph or struggle, they would face it as they had faced everything else.